Another edition here of Getting There with Goz, where we talk about the career journeys of athletes, coaches, media members, and more. You know the name, you know the voice if you're a Central New York and Syracuse sports fan. He is the man-child, Jim Lerch. The man-child is joining us now. I'm going to call him man-child throughout the interview because that's how everybody knows him, but we got to start at the beginning. A younger man-child, dare I say a child, 6, 7, 8 years old. Tell us where you grew up. What did you want to be as a kid? And was it your same dream job when you were 18?
Well, that's interesting. I mean, I grew up in Queens. Queens Village is my hometown. And my family lived in that house in Queens Village, bought it literally 6 months before I was born on 219th Street in good old Queens Village. And that's where I spent my childhood and really up until I was in my mid-20s almost. So long time living in that house. Shared a bunk bed with my brother, and my two sisters were literally not even in the adjoining room, because what we did is we took a bedroom, we put a half wall, or, went to the ceiling, but it, had a doorway. And we took a room, split it into two rooms, and they had a bunk bed on one side of the wall. We had a bunk bed on the other side of the wall, and there was no door between us. It was just a doorway. So it was a pretty tight quarters between the four of us, all essentially in one bedroom in a house in good old Queens Village. So that's where I grew up. And it was a typical Queens neighborhood, you go knock on your buddy's door, played stickball in the streets, all that kind of stuff. And I think maybe you could say in a lot of ways that, my love of sports, my passion for sports, not only watching it, but playing it was birthed on those streets of Queens, where we used to play stickball in the streets and go down to the schoolyard to play a little stickball. We would, just make believe when we were playing our stickball games. I've been a diehard Met fan, diehard Giants fan, as you can see on my shirt here. So I got those New York sports running through my veins. And so, back then I was, at the plate, I was Tommy Agee, I was Cleon Jones, I was Ron Swoboda. Those were the guys that I was at the plate. Willie Stargell of the Pirates and twirling that bat, all those kinds of things, that kind of was coursing through my veins as I was playing sports as a youngster. And then being around my dad, who watched a lot of sports, who loved the same teams that I love, I started watching sports. I started, honey, you are in the background of this picture that we are shooting right now.
It's okay. I think it's hilarious.
What are you doing? I told you this was a video, and you're going to fold wash in the background. Okay. Sorry about that, guys.
You're all good.
That out. Where was I? I just looked down to the camera. I looked away from the camera for a second, down into the video screen. I'm like, what is she doing back there?
I might leave it in. It's so funny. It's hilarious. But anyways, you were talking about what your favorite sports. Like your dad taught you how to become a sports fan.
So my dad was a big watcher of sports, and so he was a Met fan, a Giants fan, and he used to have his buddies come over to the house. And then what I did is I started to kind of want to buddy up with my dad. He would watch sports. I liked sports, so I started watching sports, and then I would sit in front of the TV, and like so many young sportscasters, I just would start calling the game, and I'd be like, 2-2 count here on Cleon Jones as he steps into the box. Mets down 2, and I was Lindsey Nelson, I was Bob Murphy, I was Ralph Kiner on The Color. I mean, I played all of the roles. And, my dad's friends used to get a kick out of it. They used to kind of mess around with me and make fun of me, but it didn't deter me from wanting to do that. I think I've always said this about getting into media and doing some of the things that I've had the pleasure of doing over the years. And that is that I've always kind of had the performance bug, that when the light turns on, something special happens. And I kind of, maybe it's like an out of body experience a little bit for me, but it just kind of comes out of me. And so it was coming out of me as a young child. But I can tell you, it wasn't a very straightforward route for me, guys. I really had a long and arduous journey to get back to sports later in my life. And we can kind of walk through that road a little bit if you want.
Yes, that's what it's all about, getting there with Goz. I knew right when I booked you for this, you were one of my favorite people. And I say that ever since, like you say that for everybody. No, I know man-child's story, and trust me, it is not conventional in any way. So let's do that. You're 18 years old. It's time to graduate high school. Most of the time in these interviews, I talk about where you're going to go to college and the broadcasting schools and everything else. But this is kind of part one of why the man-child nickname comes, because it is not sports you pursue post high school, correct?
No, it's not. What I ended up doing, even though I was a good student in high school and was looking forward to doing the college, is I went into the work world. The family could have used the bucks. I needed the bucks, so it wasn't a really, lavish upbringing. And so, money was somewhat important at that point. So even though I had desires to go to college and knew that I could be successful in college, I didn't end up going to college. I went into the work world. And of all the places to land, I was very good in both math and science as a young student, particularly math. That I decided to go the math route, and I land in an accounts payable department at a defense contractor uh, as an accountant, essentially a bean counter, paying invoices and counting up numbers and adding lots of things. And so I landed in that job, and I stayed in that job for a number of years. I want to say about 7 years. That I hung in that career, was making money. I had my own car. I mean, life was kind of good for the man child, considering where I was as a child and where I was at that point, really developing some independence, getting out into the real world and just kind of experience, what a 9 to 5 job is all about. So that's kind of where I headed. And so that thing of sports, that was gone. I mean, that was just watching Met games at this point, and just enjoying going to a few Met games a year. And that's where I kind of got my sports fix. But, I was in the real world. I had a real job at that point.
Yeah, it's a hobby. It's not a profession. It's not a career. So you're in your mid 20s. Life is good. You've got a car. You're doing your thing. You got money in your pocket. What changes?
Well, what changes is I think that we all, I think as human beings, would love to gravitate to our passions, right? We'd love to find what it is, that one thing that we love to do, and then do it and make money doing it. It's a lot of fun when you can get to that place. And not everybody is lucky enough to do that, to get to do the one thing that they love to do. And so, I was going to that accounting job every day, and, I was giving them an honest day's work, from 9 to 5, but I wasn't getting up in the morning wanting to go. And I certainly was waiting for that ding 5 o'clock to ring so that I could, just head on off to my next distraction, and so as that started to happen more and more often, and I was getting that feeling inside that maybe I just wasn't on the right path anymore. So even though I had some nice things in my life, the path just wasn't feeling right. And so I kind of, talked to my parents, talked to people close to me and said, I think I got to change. I got to make a change here. And so my mom always had wanted me to go to college, and I think was very disappointed that I didn't go to college right away. So, she was a big, big piece of this. And she said, why don't you go to college? You can still go to college. And I was like, I guess I could. So I did it the slow path. I actually took one course at night just to test it. Um, I was asking around, okay, if I'm going to go back to college, what am I going to go back to college for? And so I started asking friends of mine, like, what do I love to do? What would I love to do every day? And every single one of them came back with me the same answer. Sports, calling games. You're like, because I was that guy that even though I was no longer in front of the TV set as a little kid from my dad, pretending to be Lindsey Nelson, when I was out, say, bowling with my buddies, I'd be like, all right, here's Mike Foley, my best buddy here on the lane, needs a strike here to win the match. Like I would just do that stuff. It was just weird, I guess, but it was just being myself. And I think that my friends kind of knew what my passion was, and it was right in front of me. I didn't really know it. And so they said, sports, man, go back to school to be a sportscaster. And I was like, I don't even know how to do that. They have schools for that, And so you can take communications courses in college and take TV and radio, and that all kind of leads down that primrose path. So I was like, all right, I'll try it. So I took one course at night. The next semester after that, and did well. The next semester I took 2 courses at night, did really well in those 2 courses, did them both at a community college, kept my full-time job while I was doing that. And then finally got an opportunity to leave my job and get paid for a year because they were taking voluntary layoffs. And I went back to college full time. And that's when I really dug in. And then I got involved in the student newspaper. I got involved in the student radio station. I started creating content on my own back when that wasn't even the thing, creating content. That's like a modern day thing now, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I just started creating content and delivering content, and I just loved it. And then I knew. And then I was like, okay, this is going to go from 2-year school to 4-year school. I end up at Syracuse University, get involved at WAER, the big student station there where Bob Costas and Marv Albert and all my heroes, went to. And, that kind of bubbled into, what turned out to be a career here in Central New York.
Yeah, and that WAER, the path we usually hear from fellow Syracuse alums like yourself, we hear about that moment when you show up and everybody there is a sports fan. Everybody wants to be in the next Costas and Marv Albert and all these other guys who've gone on to have great success, and women as well. And usually they talk about a bunch of teenagers who show up who don't know what they're doing. But tell us, isn't this where the nickname comes?
Like, this is how it goes.
Okay, so take us through it.
This is interesting. I just had on my radio show last week, one of my buddies, he was actually the sports director at WAER at the time when I acquired the nickname. And my co-host on my radio show asked him about acquiring the nickname. Had this happen, is the story he's given us the right story, so on and so forth. And he backed me up 100%.
Was it Carter Blackburn?
No, it was not Carter Blackburn.
Okay.
John Bloom was the guy who I interviewed. He covers the Phoenix Suns. Obviously, they're in the NBA Finals right now. So John came on the show to talk Phoenix Suns. And, of course, we reminisced about the good old days at WAER. But John was a guy who really gave me my break in college, because WAER was all seniority based. And John took a chance on me because, remember, I went to 2-year college and then came to Syracuse to get my bachelor's degree. So I was coming in as a junior transfer. And at WAER, you got to work your way up the ladder. So I had a lot of experience. As I told you, I was working at the student newspaper. I was doing my own radio stuff. I created a sports show on the radio in junior college. So I was doing content already, and I felt like I was ready for the next step. But I was thwarted by a lot of guys at WAER, and John, I just said to John, just give me an honest crack. I know that I don't have seniority on these other guys that have been here for 2 years, but I'm going to work harder. And I'm more ready than they are. And don't forget, I'm 10 years older than most of these guys. So, I bring a little more to the table, a different thing to the table. Maybe more is not fair, but I bring something different to the table. And wouldn't you love to have that on your staff? Wouldn't that be cool to have somebody with a different perspective? So I just sold John as much as I could, and John bought it, thank God. And so he gave me my break, and I was able to do play-by-play for lacrosse, for football, and for basketball under John's leadership. And inevitably, before I left WAER, was offered the sports director position, the most prestigious spot. And I actually turned it down. We can go through that story if you want, but it was a fascinating ride to think that a guy who transferred in, who most people were saying, you're never going to even be on the staff. You're never going to call a game. You're in the game too late. It's not going to happen. And let me tell you something, that did not sit well with me, because I came to Syracuse University to do all of those things. And I had people basically saying, oh no, that dream of yours, you can put that on the back burner. You're too late to the party. And I just refused to accept that. I was like, baloney, I'm too late to the party. I'm going to crash down that door. I'm going to knock down that door, and you're not going to stop me. And thank God, John was the guy who gave me my break. So
I'm still getting chills from hearing that. I've heard that story a few times because we've worked together, and especially now when we're taping this in the summer of 2021, where there are so many more people maybe than ever before who are going to follow your path and say, you know what? My life has changed post-COVID. Yeah. I want to do something different. I want to follow my passion. I don't care what age I am. I'm going to do exactly what Manchild did, and I'm going to go after it and have that same type of passion that he did. Now, you said you turned down that opportunity to be the sports director. Is it because you're offered a professional job at the next level?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah,
what is that job?
Well, basically what happened is I ended up being at Syracuse for 5 semesters. So 2.5 years really to finish my studies. Sometimes when you transfer out of junior college, they don't accept all your credits. And so you lose a few. And so that was okay with me, hanging around for an extra semester. If I had taken the sports director job, I would have had to stick around for an extra year. So I would have gotten out of school 6 months later. I would have, had to just kind of take a couple of courses, pay more money. I don't know. And I wanted to get out and get into the professional world. And I already was at that time, just around the time that, December was rolling around, that 5th semester, I was already starting to do some professional work for the Syracuse Crunch. And I wasn't getting paid a lot of money, but it was professional. I was getting paid for doing sports, and that's professional. I don't care what anyone says to you out there, folks. If you're getting paid for what you're doing, you're a pro. Now start putting on that pro hat and trying to figure out how to make more money out of it, how to double down and get something else out of it, how to make your role, expand your role, make your role more important. So certainly I believed all those things. And so that was one of a number of reasons why I didn't take the sports director job. Something that I still probably have a teeny tiny bit of regret about, just because of the prestige and the fact that I would have been, I think, the first ever transfer student to be offered the sports director job. That was kind of cool, and to turn it down. Nobody turns that job down. Everybody applies for it to try to get it, because you get to decide who does what games. I mean, you're like totally in control of the sports department. I mean, a student, in that department says, you're doing that game, you're not doing that game. You're going on that trip, you're not doing on that trip. So I could have done all the big games. I could have, had all the good trips. I could have picked and choose, what I got to do. I didn't take that road. I have some minimal regrets about it, but I really believe that getting into the professional world was much, much more important. Just to go back and answer your question about how I got the nickname, because I didn't really answer that question. So here's how I got the nickname. So I'm on the staff at WAER. It's a typical Thursday afternoon, whatever day of the week it was, and we would do those 90-second sportscasts during the programming, And so I was already on the staff, and I was delivering my cast that afternoon. And if you've ever done sportscasting, if you write sports flashes, you write them up, and then you kind of you time them out and you read them aloud, make sure that you don't have any tongue twisters in there. You just kind of work it out before you deliver it on the air, So it's the craft of writing and practicing and then going in the booth and actually delivering it live. So I was getting ready to deliver my live sportscast, and all of the freshmen and sophomores were lining up, because we had this thing every week where you met with the personnel director, who was another student, who would listen to your tapes, either your cast tapes if you were trying to get cleared to do casts, or your play-by-play tape. If it were basketball season, lacrosse season, football season, they would listen to a segment of your tape, something that you had recorded earlier in the week or the prior weekend, and then they would critique it. And that's how you get on the staff, as you go through this process of basically getting beat down over and over and over again. And then finally the sports director clears you, and now you are allowed to start doing games. You're in the rotation now. So I was already in the rotation. The young freshmen and sophomores were waiting to be heard, trying to get into the rotation. And my buddy just walked into the room. I was reading my sportscast aloud and practicing. And this, around the elbow of this room, because it was like a long hallway that had like a right angle down to the personnel director's desk, were these youngsters. And he just pointed at me and goes, "You're a man child." And I just kind of looked over and said, "I don't get it. What are you talking about?" He says, "You're a man child." I was like, "Okay." And I said, "Can you just explain what it is that you're trying to say?" "A man among children." And I just kind of turned and looked, and I saw all the young freshman, sophomore faces. Remember, I'm 10 years older. I'm already a grown man, so to speak. And the whole staff looked at me that way. I was the only grown man on the staff. While these guys were all out partying and going crazy, guess what the Manchild was doing? Studying his charts, getting his next thing ready. Because this was career for me. This was no fooling around. I didn't come to Syracuse to party. That wasn't the reason I was there anyway. So, not that I didn't have some fun in college. I wasn't a complete stick in the mud, but to those guys, I probably was. So it was my friend Rhett Lewis, who's no longer in the business, was the one who screamed that out. And then, literally, I come in the next day for my shift, and I run into one of the other staffers, and he's like, "Hey, what's up, Manchild?" I was like, "Huh?" Right. And then, okay, no, all right, whatever, and then I come in the next day, and two other guys, "Hey, Manchild, what's up, Manchild?" Then the whole staff is calling me Manchild. So I lose my first name, Jim. Nobody's calling me Jim. Nobody's calling me Jim Lerch. Nobody's calling me Lerch. They're all just calling me Manchild. I was like, all right, I guess this is mine now. I guess I better just own it and move on. That was it. That was what it was all about. A man among children.
Yeah, it's almost setting me up. The next few questions, like the myths of the man-child, this is what it's going to feel like, because there's going to be some questions I'm going to ask you, and you're going to feel like maybe even at times uncomfortable that you're going to be giving yourself credit for this, because these are truly Central New York myths that I'm going to get after. And one involves this timeline you just touched on there. So you get a professional job, but maybe my timeline is off. I thought you were a part of a local news station as a sports reporter. And I'll ask this question. Is it true that you invented Friday Night Lights here in Central New York? I say here as if I'm still living there, but the rumor is you were the one who brought the true high school football coverage to the Central New York area. Is that a myth?
It's not completely a myth. So here's how it went. So I graduate in December. I've got this little part-time gig with the Syracuse Crunch. I'm in the professional world now. I'm looking for television jobs because I was more interested in doing television than radio at that point. My Crunch gig was a radio gig, however. And I came across a job that was available at Channel 9. And I thought that they had already hired it because the job was out there for a couple of months. Their weekend sports director, Jack Morse, had retired, and they were looking for a weekend sportscaster. So I applied for the job. I called over and I spoke to their sports director, and I said, I just finished my tape, literally, I'm just got out of college. I just finished my tape. I have something I'm willing to send you. Is the job filled yet, or can I send you my tape? And he said, as a matter of fact, I'm taking home tapes this weekend. And if you get it over to me, if you hand deliver it to me by 4 o'clock, I'll take it home with me. I was like, what? Sure. Okay. I'll be right over, literally, got my jet engines on my car and rushed over to Channel 9 and handed him my cover letter, my resume, and my tape. Here you go. And so there were probably hundreds of people that applied for that job. And my tape, because of the timing of it, went in the pile of the finalists and got taken home that weekend. So me and about 5 or 6 other people went home to be viewed. Everyone else was in the trash at this point. And somehow I moved to the front of the line just because I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And maybe said a few things that maybe intrigued their sports director. And so he took the tapes home that weekend, and that's how I ended up getting the job at Channel 9. He liked my tape. He watched it actually with his, I think at the time, 17, 18-year-old son. And his son really liked me too. He says, I like that guy. And so because his son and him watched it together and somehow gave me the green light, I end up, at the front of the line, right? From nowhere to the front of the line. And so a couple of more brief interviews and I get the gig. And so I'm hired at Channel 9. And so there's 3 of us at Channel 9. The guy who was the weekday producer got pushed into the weekend job, and they actually asked me, the job that was being offered to me was essentially executive sports producer. So I'd be working with the sports director every day, writing his cast. I'd do some reporting, and I'd be the fill-in anchor. And that's how I started at Channel 9. And so that was cool, and that was good with me. I was perfectly comfortable with that job, and I loved that I was working Monday to Friday instead of having to work the long weekends, right? That's always a sacrifice that a lot of people in TV make. They become the weekend anchor, and you got to stay there for a while before you can get to the sports director job, maybe even change markets, because those sports director jobs are hard to come by, right? And so I was happy to have the 9, a little bit, not 9 to 5, but to have the Monday to Friday gig. It was more like 1 in the afternoon to midnight. Okay, that's pretty typical in the regular TV world, the local TV world for sports people. So I took the gig, and then I did, start doing various things for the station on my reporting. And one of the gigs that I got assigned to was an Athlete of the Week piece where we went out and found good athletes who were also excellent students, showed excellent leadership ability, and we would do a full-length feature piece on them and give them a trophy and award. And we actually named that award after the weekend anchor who had just retired to make a job available for me, Jack Morse. We call it the Jack Morse Award. And so because Jack was at Channel 9 for, I don't know, like 40 years or something. He was the weekend anchor there forever. So, and Jack had a nice connection, I think, with the high schools over the time that he was there. I didn't know him very well because as he was leaving, I was coming in. But I had heard about him. And so so that kind of got me into the high school circles. And then we started talking about doing a show that included football and basketball highlights, in particular football. And most of the local teams play on Friday nights, as you know. So Dave Donovan, who was the weekend anchor, had talked about doing this. And I think that probably, I don't want to take credit away from Dave because I think Dave was kind of doing some semblance of this before I arrived. But because I was the Monday to Friday guy working alongside the sports director, I ended up landing the gig. There's a little more depth to that story, but I think there's enough here to just explain it. I end up landing the gig as the Friday night, you say lights, we called it Friday Night Fever. That was the name that we gave it, and we created all these graphics for it, and they still call it Friday Night Fever over on Channel 9. So, yeah, it was a big part of birthing that. And the big thing for me was that I wanted to be an ad libber. I wanted to kind of, shoot from the hip a little bit. I wanted to do what Warner Wolf did in television in New York when I was a youngster. I followed all those New York sportscasters. And Warner Wolf just loved to do goofy stuff. He would throw cue cards over his shoulder. He would, hold up scores and then, trash them or not. He would just do silly stuff. And of course he had the big line, let's go to the videotape. That was his big thing. Right. And so Warner was just a very playful guy. And I said, that's what I want to be. I want to be the fun sportscaster. I want to be the playful guy. And so when I was given that Friday Night Fever anchoring gig on Friday nights, I just embraced it. And I said, I'm going to do it differently than I've ever seen it done before. And I guess would be kind of the equivalent of, what a lot of the Sports Center anchors eventually started doing, what what Patrick and Oberman used to do, just the silly, the goofy, the being willing to ad lib. I asked the anchors to all sit on the set with me when I did Friday Night Fever and just say stuff to me, like react, that I might say things to them in the middle of the highlights. And I just wanted them to just naturally react, to laugh, to giggle, to comment, and not worry about bothering me, because we were there to just entertain an audience. And it took a number of weeks for the rest of the crew to kind of buy in. But when they did, it started to become a lot of fun. And I don't think it was a lot of fun just for me. I think it was a lot of fun for the audience, and it was a lot of fun for the anchors who were participating as well.
I think it's important also to offer up some perspective here of the time. And we're talking about the mid 90s at this point. So you reference like Sports Center's hot right now. This is Friday Night Fever, something that's never been done before in that central New York area. You are having more fun than you could even imagine, because you're kind of basically, for lack of a better phrase, the guinea pig of, I don't know how this is going to work, but we're going to have as much fun as we can while we're doing it. And with that being said, how you're doing it in a unique style, you're showing off your personality, you're having fun. This is, in the sports landscape, we're talking about sports media now at this point, of the emergence of sports talk radio. Like WFAN had sports talk with Mike and the Mad Dog, but really like the mid to late 90s is when this starts to grow and it starts to move towards a local level, which presents you with a unique opportunity, because 620 and others are starting to grow. Kind of take us through that timeline of how it seemed to be television, but this is slowly starting to come into what radio is going to look like in central New York.
Yeah, absolutely right. As a matter of fact, if I just step back just a little bit further, back to the end of my tenure in college, the last thing I did before I left WAER, even though I did not take the sports director job, was I helped WAER through a big written proposal and inevitably creating something. I said to them, we have all these staff members and we're just doing play-by-play and these little, 90-second sportscasts. Why don't we do some talk content? Talk radio is red hot. And so I literally put a proposal through to the college hierarchy and got approved, essentially the first ever talk program at WAER. And that's a legacy that I've actually left behind. I handed it off to, of all people, Adam Shine, who you might be familiar with down in the New York City area. And Adam took it and ran with it. I handed it to Adam, and then Adam continued to carry the torch. And they now still continue to do talk radio on WAER. And they had never done that before I had arrived. So that was kind of cool to leave something behind, even though I didn't take that sports director job. So now fast forward to where you're saying, I'm at Channel 9. I'm there for like 5 years. My boss at that point isn't going anywhere. I'm ready now to move up to the next level. So I was looking at TV jobs in other markets. I was actually very close to landing a job in Orlando, Florida. I was one of 2 finalists. I thought I was going to get the job and didn't. It was very disappointing. And right off of that disappointment, Adam Shine, my buddy, who was, took over that talk product and then actually graduated from school while I was at Channel 9 and started his own talk show on Sports Radio 620, all right, gave me a call, all right. The guy that was under me now called me and said, hey, I got an interesting gig here that I think you might want. And I was like, okay, what is it? He says, over here at the radio station I work at, they're looking for a program director. I was like, what is that? And he was trying to explain it to me. And I was like, I don't know if I'm experienced in that area, And he's like, no, you have all the right tools. I'm telling you right now, you're perfect for the job. I was like, I don't think so, Adam. I'm really looking for TV. I just came off a disappointment. I almost had this job in Orlando. I just think I want to keep beating the bush here and try and move up in market size, see if I can get something in a bigger market. He's like, no, I'm telling you, man, this is a perfect job for you. Come interview for it, man. You got nothing to lose. Let me put you in touch with the 2 guys who are hiring the position, yada, yada, yada. So I ended up doing 4 interviews with these guys. 3 times I said no to them. I went back a 4th time, and my wife at the time was with child, getting ready to deliver child. I think it was only like a month away. My first and only child, my son Isaiah, who's now 19.
What?
And yep, he's 19 and in college. We can talk about that if you want. Yeah, you are getting old. So am I. So am I. And children will show your mortality more than anything else in your life. You will find that out, guys. All right. You will find out how mortal you are. You are not immortal. I am not immortal. No one is immortal. Children will show you that. You will see how fast they grow, and that just shows how old you're getting. But anyway, where was I?
Zay's gonna get born. Zay's on the way, basically.
Yeah, Zay's on the way, and I go for interview 4, and I say, my wife is about to deliver, starting a new job right now. I have a son, I knew it was a boy. I have a son on the way. He's going to be here in a couple of weeks. Like, I just don't know if this is the right time for me to be changing jobs and even thinking about this. And I said, how about this? We will let you take as much time off as you need when your wife delivers that baby, and then you can start work for us when you're ready. I was like, what do you mean as much time as I want? They were like, as much time as you want. Want to take a few months? Take a few months. Maybe during that time, the only thing we might ask of you is to come to a few meetings, do a few things, work a little bit from home, but no coming into the office. You can just stay home and raise your child. I was like, what? And I was going to get like, I don't know, 2 weeks from Channel 9 or something. I was just saved up all my vacation. I don't even know if dads at that point were even getting any leave time. So I was just, I was going to get a couple of weeks and I was going to be like, sorry, honey, I'll see you after work, So I know she wasn't feeling too good about that. And I was like, boy, that's an incentive. I was like, really? You guys would do that, huh? And they're like, absolutely, And so I took them up on their offer. And so I took a few months. And so I accepted the job and took the job and kind of worked out the pay structure until I came into the office full time. And I got a chance to kind of, be around at the beginnings of raising my son, which was important to me. So that was pretty cool. And that's why I ended up taking the gig in radio.
Amazing story. And now I have to pull up this graphic on our visual sign because I wrote Shine Myth here because, again, this is the stuff I grew up with. Not to age you and Adam, and I've told you this before, so you won't feel as bad. Like, as a Central New Yorker, I listened to Bud and The Manchild, which you're going to get to in a second. And primetime Adam Shine is what he called himself back then. And again, I'm a kid who's watching McNabb and these great Syracuse teams going to Pop Warner football practice. And my dad realizing, wait a second, I can do this as a job. They're talking about my teams, and those are the shows I grew up with. I thought the story was you had heard Adam on like a lacrosse post-game show, and he had a Long Island and downstate accent, and you guys there's no truth to like you hearing None. Adam and hiring him. Okay, that's a myth that I thought I had heard.
Adam had the gig first. As a matter of fact, I probably want to, you say you make mistakes, and I think I actually made a mistake. When I was hired as the program director, Adam was the afternoon drive host, right? He, like I said, kind of convinced me to do the interview and then be hired. So I'm being hired essentially as his boss. And so I take the job and Adam's there. Well, within a couple of months, I'm going to say less than 6 months, Adam gets offered work down in New York. I think initially for WFAN and some other things. He eventually lands a gig with the NFL Network, as we know. I think he's still working for the NFL Network, and now he's even doing CBS TV. So I think he's still doing
Sirius as well.
Some connection of all of that, right? Sirius XM, and yeah. So Adam has very much moved into that world and done a phenomenal job. But Adam's just a couple of months after I take the job, this is, I got a gig in New York and I think I'm going to be leaving. I'm like, leaving? You convinced me to come here. Are you crazy? You can't leave. You're the afternoon drive host.
How old is Adam, by the way, for those who know? He's like 23, isn't he?
Yeah, he's a youngster. But he was a big hit when he got out of, no he loved talk. That was one of the reasons why after I created the talk product at WAER, I handed it off to him for the next year. I said, you're here for another year and a half. Please, take this thing and run with it. I know you love talk. I got this thing launched for you. I've done all the legwork. Take it to the next level, man. Make it something that's going to stick forever. And he did. I owe Adam for that. I mean, he did a phenomenal job of making that talk product important to WAER so much that they're still doing it today and provides a lot of opportunity for students. A lot of students don't know. I started that whole thing. I mean, maybe someone else would have eventually, but it's kind of nice to leave a legacy behind, leave something behind that you created. So that's the real story. And Adam's going to leave. And I say to him, well, I mean, can't we work something out? How about I'll hook you up down in New York and you can get an ISDN line down there, which is technology for radio, makes you sound like you're in the studio, and you can do the show until I get another guy for afternoon drive. This is going to be a search. I got to find the right person. How about can you do the show from home for a little while you're working your other gigs? And he was like, all right. And so we did that for a while and I dragged him through it. And I'm sorry that I did. Adam, I owe you an apology if you watch this. Okay. The Manchild made a mistake. I should have let you go. I should have let you do your own thing. I just panicked at what am I going to do without Adam? And of course we survived, and as a matter of fact, not only did we survive, but it helped me create my talk show, Bud and The Manchild, which still in some semblance now. Bud retired a few years ago, is still on the air now, almost 20 years. It helped launch another local host here in Central New York, who's still on the radio as well. It was just a really positive thing when it was all said and done. But I won't lie to say that I kind of dragged Adam along for a while, and then just saw that he didn't want to do it anymore. And I was like, all right, man, get out. And it's cool. Like, you're out. I don't know why I did this to you. I just panicked, I guess, whatever. So Adam did leave, and we figured out afternoon drive, and we did a good job at that station for a long, long time before they finally changed formats.
On the block with Brent X, by the way. Brent X is, yes, by the way, who you talked about. Who
that's the other person, right? That's the other person.
And I'm not trying to take anything away from the X, man. I would love to ask about that story, but I kind of want to go. If X wants to come on, we'll let him tell his side of that story. Sure. I want to talk about Bud and the Manchild, especially now, again, taping in 2021. What has happened in the sports radio landscape in particular is that the history of the Dan Le Batard show with Stu Gatz has come out, where Stu Gatz is a program director. John Wiener is his real name, but he is looking for a local journalist, a local columnist to join the radio side of it. Right. And he hires Dan Le Batard in Miami. And now they're getting paid $50 million by DraftKings. Well, far before that, another program director hires a local journalist and columnist to come on the radio. Take us through. And I feel like this might be an episode in its own right if we could ever figure out how Bud can do Zoom, which might be a struggle in its own right. But how did you figure out the idea of Bud and the Manchild?
Well, basically, it was pretty simple. I mean, my bosses said, all right, we got to figure out this afternoon drive thing. I went out there and I did find Brent. So that was one thing. And it was interesting. I was just actually driving out to Turning Stone one night with a college buddy of mine who had come into town, and he was just flipping through channels, and Brent was doing a show in Utica at the time. And we picked them up about 2/3 of the way out to Turning Stone, because you're getting out towards Utica when you're heading out, towards the Oneida Indian Nation there. And I was like, hey, this guy's not bad. And he's like, hey, man, you're looking for an piece of afternoon drive here, aren't you? Why don't you talk to this guy? I was like, maybe I will, And then I looked him up online, and, we had those little radio bios on the old websites back then. And it said that he went to Bishop Ludden High School, and he was from Syracuse. I was like, oh, this guy's local. He's going to want to come home. I'm going to rescue him from Utica and bring him to Syracuse. Who wouldn't want to do that, man? Probably a little bit better pay. You're coming back home. He probably has family here. Come on. He's come back to his high school buddies. Who wouldn't want to do that? And so Brent obviously did like that idea. And once we negotiated a salary and whatnot, then he was down with it. But while that was all going on, actually a little prior to that, my bosses said, well, why don't you, fill part of that void? And I was like, I don't know if I want to do talk radio like every day. I've got this big job, program director. Like, that's a lot. I'm sitting in meetings. You don't understand. Doing a talk show is a lot of prep, especially if you do it by yourself. And so I was like, all right, I'll think about it. Let me think about it. I'm trying to come up with answers. And I went home that night and I was like, I don't know if I want to do this. But you know what? If I get a partner, then half the work will be taken care of. I only have to do half as much work. and you know what? I've gotten, and then Brent kind of comes along and I go, and I've got this other guy. We could split up that 4 hours of afternoon drive. I think Adam was doing all 4 hours. We can split it up to 2 chunks of 2 hours. And I can do 2 of the hours with a partner, half as much time. And then with a guy working with me, now I'm down to a quarter of the work, right? And then I could give Brent, theoretically, the other 2 hours. And I think he was already doing a 2 or 3 hour show out in Utica. So he's going to consider that pretty much what he's been doing. And that's what we did. And so we split afternoon drive 3 to 5 and 5 to 7. Bud and I were doing the later piece, and Brent was doing the earlier piece. And how I landed on Bud was simple. I just said, I got to find a partner. And I said, I want to find somebody who can be a bit of a storyteller. I want to find somebody who has a better Syracuse history than I do, because I had only been in Syracuse as a college student. I was a St. John's fan when I grew up in Queens. So I knew of Syracuse, but I wasn't really steeped in Syracuse history. So I needed somebody who had that. And I needed somebody who had opinions. And my thought was, well, a columnist, that's what they do, right? They write from the heart, right? They write what's on their mind. They're not writing game stories anymore. They're writing opinion pieces. So wouldn't that be good? And so there were 2 columnists in the market, Bob Snyder and Bud Poliquin. They both worked at the Post-Standard. Well, Snyder was older than Poliquin. And I don't know, dare I say, a little less hip to me. I don't know if that's true or not. But, I just thought Bud would be the better person to talk to first. And so I sat down and talked with Bud. We had a little lunch together, and I said, "Hey, want to make a little extra money? Would you be willing to do this? Can we work it around your newspaper schedule?" And we figured it out, and I hired him. That was that. It was one
The,
meeting. Bud and I had one meeting, and then I just had to figure out salary, and that was it. It was that simple.
the longest running sports talk show in the history of Syracuse, unless somebody beats it at some point. But right now, the bar has been set by Bud and the Manchild on a different variation of stations across. At one point, Manchild, I'm going to have Bud figure out how to work this software, and I want to do a whole history of Bud and the Manchild. So that might be an episode down the line, because I feel like you and I could do 2 hours on all the things that have changed and all that. So I'm going to pass. I have the theme song banner ready to go. I had so many questions about it, but I'm going to pass and just kind of go down the history of you. Changes start to happen in the entire radio business in January of 2009 in particular. Again, we saw this with a new president, with different things. January, take us through what happens for your career, January 2009, and what happens after that.
Yeah, I mean, January 2009, kind of a dark time. Really, I would say almost the year leading up to it, things just didn't feel right in radio where I was working at Clear Channel. Big national company, owns more radio stations than any other company. It's now iHeartMedia, for those of you that don't know. That's what Clear Channel has become. And there was just a lot going on in the business where they were starting to automate more programming. They were going away from local programming. Budgets were being cut. I was a program director the whole time I was there. I knew what was going on with the budgets. And every year I was seeing my budget shrink and shrink and shrink. And I was like saying to myself, they're not going to be able to afford me before too long. They're certainly not going to be able to keep Brent before too long. And so really, I think a year or so before 2009, Brent was laid off, which broke my heart. He was my right-hand man. He worked his tail off. I brought him there, and I felt responsible for it. And I'll tell you, during that year where he was gone and I was still there, there was a lot of guilt coursing through my veins that I still had a job and he didn't. He was trying to figure out his life. Now, he did figure it out, so good for him. But it definitely broke my heart, the way that went down. And then inevitably a year later, guess what? It was my turn. I was sat down and basically told, sorry, we just go in a different direction. The old line, we're going a different direction. So I was like, wow. I mean, gosh, at that point I was programming 2 radio stations, doing 3 hours an afternoon drive, one of those hours without Bud, and just, pushing myself to the limit from a work standpoint, working, 14, 15 hours a day. I mean, I was working, I had about 7 different job titles. There was nothing I didn't do. I worked on the websites. I worked in the promotions department. I was the program director. I was an on-air host. I mean, it just went on and on and on. I was at the time the news director, because our news director left and they didn't want to replace him. So I became responsible for this whole news product on WSYR radio. It was a lot of responsibility that was landing on my shoulders, probably too much when it was really all said and done. But somehow, some way, they said, even this guy with all this responsibility and working as hard as he did, we got to let him go. So they let me go. And that was a big blow. I was like, wow, what do I do now? I'll just never forget that day. I'll never forget taking the box of my stuff out to my car, arriving home, putting that box down, and then going, what do I do now? It was a weird feeling. It's the only time I've ever been laid off in my life. But it led to a change in thinking. And one of the things I discovered was, you know what? We had some paid programs that were on the radio that we treated very, very well. None of those people were laid off. None of those people were let go because they were bringing in money, revenue, baby, not expense, but revenue. And so when I saw that, and then an opportunity came available with one of our competitors in the sports radio market, and their program director, I read an article, he was quoted in the newspaper saying, we want more local programming. I was like, oh, do you really? So I called him and I said, do you really want more local programming? Because I got a show. It's only been off the air for 6 months. I think I could deliver it to you if you're interested. And he said, absolutely. I loved your show. And so that was how that was birthed. And I said, I'll do it only under one condition. I do not want to work for you. I do not want to be laid off by you. I do not want to be controlled by you. I want to own the show. I want to buy the time from you, and I will pay you for it. And then you will trust me to do great content, because I will do great content for you. You've heard the show before. Nothing's really going to change. As a matter of fact, hopefully it gets bigger and better. And I've been doing the show under that model now for, gosh, it's got to be about 9 years now, up to 20.
Think about that. That's the early 2010 decade where people who host podcasts and YouTube channels right now are like, wait a second. He was doing that 10 years ago?
Yeah,
yes.
it's true.
Yes, Manchild basically is doing what a lot of podcasts and YouTube and TikTok, everybody who's trying to find a way to, I guess, to come through traditional media from a non-traditional standpoint. You had that idea, and I don't want to dive too deep into that because I always say this is another awkward part of the interview where it's like, it's technically what you're doing now, so we don't have to talk about like that whole financial setup. But that's, I think, the best advice for one of the many pieces of advice we'll give. If you are somebody who is 19, 21, 22, think about what you just said, right? Where if you feel like you're showing any type of platform is making money and you feel like there's another avenue or platform to put it on, that's what you do. And
Why
you
not?
knew that already.
Correct. And I did. I think it was an advantage for me at the time that I had an established show that people knew and were familiar with. It was on the air for 11 years. So the fact that I had something that I could offer and that people were familiar with, I think helped me easily make that transition. But I still say to a lot of the students that I teach nowadays, because as you know, I teach some college courses, this is a possible route. You must consider this. Now, it's a little hard to birth yourself into conventional radio out of nothing because you're asking for a lot of trust. But, money talks, as they say, and you know what walks, right? So, I mean, if you can raise the money, if you can prove that you can deliver a good product day in and day out, I don't see why any radio station would say no to you because you are revenue, and radio stations are craving revenue. I have never been treated better as a radio host than in the last 9 years as a revenue generator rather than as a revenue drainer. And that's a big, big lesson that I learned about radio, and it still, to me, holds today.
Yes. And now when you are running your own brand, when you are a revenue generator, you have decisions, you have responsibilities. It is truly the brand in your face, but there is a transition that is made. And this is something that I think some people will go through where they're like, okay, I thought I was going to do this, but this is working. I thought that happened, but they left.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's a long way to say Bud left. Bud retired. Bud went off, right? I think he's in Florida now, hanging out, doing his thing.
Well, he's actually in Skinny Atlas doing his thing. And
he's in Skinny Atlas. I thought he was going to be a snowbird forever.
No, but he did buy a place now in Florida. So now he's 6 months up, 6 months down. He's up right now.
Nice. All right. So Bud is done. He retires. You have to make a decision. What's the future of the Bud and the Manchild show? Take us through that thought process and how a guy by the name of Boyd Green is involved.
Yeah. You know what? I said to myself years ago, and I repeated it many, many times to people over the years, my producers, when Bud goes, I know he's older than me. I know he's going to go first. I'm going to. I'm not going to do this with anyone else. It's been too good a ride. The first 3 months we did the show, it was horrible, and I was like, "This is not going to work. Audiences must hate this show right now." I went back. I was listening to it every night, and I was like, "Oh, that was so bad." Oh,
you're talking about the early Bud and the Manchild?
Yeah, I'm talking about the early Bud and the Manchild. The first 3 months of our show, we just didn't know what we were doing. I mean, I didn't know how to get anything out of him that was entertaining. Yeah, we were talking sports and we were rolling out statistics and we were analyzing games in some way, but it just wasn't interesting. And I was beginning to have doubts. And then I discovered something. It was just weird, and it kind of came out of nowhere. I started playing golf with him on Friday nights at Green Lakes State Park right here in good old central New York. And I met him and I met a bunch of his friends. He introduced me to a bunch of his friends. They were all people whose kids played Little League together up in the Fayetteville neighborhood of Syracuse. And so I met this group of, I don't know, about 20, 25 people, and we'd go out and play every Friday late afternoon, around dinner time, and just play 9 holes of golf. And I started meeting all these different people, and I started socializing with Bud. We'd have a beer afterwards, sit up on the beautiful deck there, and just chit chat. And I started to learn weird, quirky things about him. And then I just started just talking about that stuff on air. Bud, you were saying the other night, that you've never had a cup of coffee in your life. What's that all about? And then it would just lead somewhere, And so Bud loosened up around the golf world, would kind of tell stories of his life. And I started picking up on it and comparing myself to him. And then it created this whole new dialogue that became very personal between the two of us, that we actually now knew each other as people because I was learning about him through these stories of playing golf on Friday nights. And that's when the magic happened. I remember that first tape I took home after like the first time it happened. It's kind of like a Howard Stern's movie, right? Where he does that crazy commercial, right? Yes. And he realizes this is what I should be doing. It was the same thing. I took that show home that night. I was like, it seemed like there was a good bit there. And I took it home and listened back, just like, oh, that was good. That was funny. That connected. Ooh, I like that. I got to do more of that. And then I just started reaching for it, trying to find stuff, content, not in the sports world, but in his personal life, and then tie it into sports. Say, how can you think that when you do that? How can you behave that way when you behave this way? How can you have that mindset when your mindset is really over here? Because I heard you say that to your buddies. And so that kind of texture added to what really made the show tick. And people that still compliment me on that show, that still miss Bud, that still talk about that show to me in public, always say, I just love the banter between you guys. I love the chemistry. And that was all discovered just by playing golf Friday nights with his buddies. It's crazy.
The stories that will come from that show, and I promise I'm going to pressure you to make this happen, from stuff of Bud hanging out at Jim Brown's house, sitting in a car with Bill Russell. You, Manchild, this is true. Mike Tyson sings you happy birthday on your birthday. Like, those are all real stories that happened on that show. So Bud's gone. You thought you were done. You thought the show was over. You had a good run, and you were going to sail off in the sunset and continue your professor opportunities.
But like I said to you, I was having so much fun still doing the show. And even though I knew Bud was leaving and I said I was never going to do it without him, I was like, I'm still having a lot of fun doing this. And Boy Green was a student of mine at Oswego. He was in my class. He was a student that when we did this little talk radio live exercise, we do it in groups of 3, he stood out, probably more than any student I've ever had. So much so that I said to him, hey, come see me after class. And I said to him, after that very class, I said, have you ever done talk radio before? He's like, no. I was like, do you like it? He's like, yeah, I do. I was like, because you could be good at it. I thought you did a really, really good job with that. You were very unique. You stood out among your fellow students. Don't tell the other students I told you this. But you stood out. You ought to consider it. You ought to do a radio show here. Get on, a WNYO, the station up there at Oswego. See if you can get a talk show. Do it with someone else if you want. Do it by yourself. But you could create content in talk. I think you might have a future in talk, in my opinion. And he was like, oh, thanks, And then he calls me 2 weeks later, or maybe it was after class. He grabbed me and he said, hey, you do a talk radio show, don't you? I said, yeah. He said, do you take on interns? I was like, well, I haven't before, but I would. You want to come intern? He's like, yeah. So he interned. And he hung around for 2 semesters. And then he said, he's getting out of school. And he said, you guys have any you have a producer or anything? And we did. And ironically, our producer was literally leaving in 2 weeks, and I didn't have anybody. And I was like, you've interned, you kind of know the ropes. You want to be our producer? So he came on as the producer, and he hung as the producer for another year or 2. And then Bud, the writing's on the wall. I see Bud's going to retire, and I'm like, I don't know. Should I give the kid a shot, or should I try and find somebody else? So I want to keep doing this thing by myself. I never had the desire to do a show by myself. I just don't find it nearly as interesting. I don't like talking to the walls. I like having dialogue like we're having now. So that's just the way I gravitate. I'm a big fan of the 2-man show over the 1-man show. And there are people out there that do it incredibly well. Rome's been doing it for years. People like Cowherd. There are others that do the solo show. I just don't like it. I just don't find myself to be as compelling, as interesting. I just like time to think between things. I like to be able to sometimes just ad lib in a different way and play off of somebody else. I think I'm better doing that. And so I said, if I'm going to keep doing this, I got to do it with someone else. And so I went to Paul, aka Boy Green, a nickname I'd given him as an intern when he was with the show. And I said, kid, I'm willing to give you a shot if you're interested. Co-host, what do you think? And he was like, absolutely. You kidding me? So, and now Paul and I have been doing it over 3 years together. So Bud's been out for 3 years. He still comes on the show once a week, Bud. As a matter of fact, he's on Tuesdays at 11 o'clock. If you want to listen to Brunch with Bud, he does about a half hour with us every single Tuesday. And he's still the same old Bud. Nothing's changed.
Yes. And shout out to Boy Green for doing that. I know our guy Josh Murray's in the mix there at some point because he was producing an intern, or another one of your students out of Syracuse who produced my show on the Score 1260. Yep. So yeah, to Boy Green, what you just said there, I haven't had the opportunity to listen as much just because I'm out east now, but the 2 things you just said that I noticed about him, 1, extremely unique, and 2, is a hard worker. He gets the Twitter, the Facebook. He's going out and busting his thing. You know what? To make sure the show sounds good. 10 to noon on the Score 1260. Still, right? The Manchild show with Boy Green didn't change times on you all of a sudden, right? Still 10 to noon?
10 to noon. Yes, sir.
10 to noon. I got 2 more questions for you. Most people consider these maybe the most important part because it's getting there with guys. So the advice part. We talked about your professor opportunities. I'll be honest because I've told you this before so many times and so many people know me. I want to do the professor, the adjunct thing. So I'm going to be a little selfish here, or other media members who may be looking for a new course. Best advice for professors who are teaching communications, media, whatever it might be. You've been doing it for a while. Best advice for professors entering that field.
Well, I mean, I think someone like you or I, guys, I mean, we are going to enter it as what we call a practicalist. I mean, we've done it, right, for a living. So take those practical skills and create a classroom environment where you can say, okay, this may be a simulation of some sort, but this is what we do in the real world. This is how we prepare. This is how we get ready to do a play-by-play. This is how we deliver play-by-play. This is how you do a talk radio show. So one of the courses I teach is sports broadcasting up at SUNY Oswego, and that course literally, it's a once-a-week course, 3 hours on the night that it's taught. So it's like a long lab. I do like a mini lecture on the front of it, and then we actually perform the task that I kind of give them some guidelines to work around. So whether that's the 60-second or the 90-second sports flash, whether that's the talk radio show segment, whether that's the play-by-play element where we'll go out and do live play-by-play in an event. We do that every single semester, although COVID has thwarted us a little bit. We've had to do it to video screens, which has been interesting, but you got to adapt, right? Doing on set TV sportscasts, full sportscasts like Sports Center, several highlight packages, putting that stuff together. So those are just among the few of the things that we do in that course. So it's taking those great skills that we've acquired and now showing people how to do it, how to figure, how do you put their own spin on it, but how to go through the process of putting those things together. So that was one thing that I've learned. And I just think you got to love working with people. I think for me, I love the idea of being able to help someone get somewhere in the business. I know how difficult the road was for me. I know I didn't end up on ESPN. I didn't end up the next Bob Costas, but I'm still very proud of the work that I've done and the path that I've taken. And I just think that there are a lot of people that would be very happy to have done what I've done and to have achieved what I've achieved. And so I'm just more than helpful to want to get them there or get them somewhere even beyond there. I have had many people that have either worked under me at the old sports station or have interned with me who have gone well beyond. Andrew Catalan is doing, national play-by-play for the NFL nowadays. He used to intern with me for the Syracuse Crunch, my first job. He was one of my
an Albany
interns,
guy.
Okay,
Yeah,
love Andrew.
Worked down here at Capital
I know
Region,
you know Andrew. I told you my relationship with Adam Shine. Anish Shroff, who works for ESPN and does play-by-play for those guys. Mike Lissette, who continues to do TV. He's out in the Midwest right now in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but has been to many other big markets. Brian Chinaki, a former student of mine who was a sports anchor in Jacksonville for quite a while, also in Augusta, Georgia. So, it's just been a pleasure to just mentor people, to help people along the way, to answer their questions. And I think that's part of what a professor really does.
Now, the best advice to get where you are, if someone wants to follow your career path, although it is far different than maybe what you would advise to a younger 18, 19-year-old, best advice to get where you are in your career.
I think nowadays, I tell a lot of my students now, I think the better route now, rather than, I've come to this place where I don't work for somebody anymore. I just deliver content and I pay them, and I'm the rent and I'm the revenue. And, I just go out there and create great content for them. So I think nowadays, especially with everything that's opened up in podcasting, video casting, just all these new avenues that have been created in the world of sports, I would create something from the ground up. I would create something from my bedroom, my living room, my basement, and make good content, then get it out there, try and develop a following, use social in the best way that you possibly can. And then that's a great way to get discovered nowadays. It's a great way to create your own resume tape. And then now you can send that out to people. You can say, look at what I've accomplished, and I birthed this from my basement. Listen to the thoughts that I have about said sports. So find something you're passionate about, just like I did. Create original content and start there. Start in your own basement. It's not that expensive to get simple equipment that does a really nice job where you can put out quality video, quality audio, and have something that you can just send in an email to someone and say, check out what I'm doing, man. I'd love to work for you. I think that's the way to go nowadays, rather than go work for a conventional TV or radio station. I just think it's a much more difficult path, and I think you're going to suffer a lot more on that path than the other one.
He is the man-child, Jim Lerch. Love his advice, both professor and the stories. I'm telling you, keep your phone on. I'm going to text you. We got a Bud and The Manchild episode coming up soon. Thank you so much for doing this, especially for somebody like me who is now rehearing your story. How many things have now kind of hit me in the face that you've had to face, and the advice you just offered there about a new platform. I needed to hear that. Hopefully someone listening right now wanted to hear that same advice too that you offered up. Thank you so much for doing this, and you're not done with me. I'm going to keep bothering you this fall.
My pleasure, guys. Anytime. I'm always happy to come back on with you and give you what you want. I hope I delivered some of that.
Yes, I'm going to sit in the back of your class at Oswego one day too. I'm just going to hang out and watch one of your class.
You're welcome anytime, my friend.
Appreciate it, man, child. 10 to noon on the Score
Got it.
1260.
All right.